Okay, hello and welcome to the As You Are podcast. My name is Leslie Vandergans. I'm the founder of Enso Coaching and Consulting. And we are just asking you to come as you are.
You're here.
Shit.
just as you are.
So we're going to be discussing all things leadership, awareness, and we're joined with the amazing Kyle M.K.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Hi. Thank you.
Author.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah. Author, strategy advisor
Strategy advisor.
of the economics of emotion. Adam, thank you.
I've heard of that book.
What?
I think I was there when that book started.
Oh.
Adam is the
Some
reason
history.
the book exists.
Well, tell us a little bit about it. Economics of emotion.
Yeah. It really does start with Adam Roberts. I had what was it? It was 2017, I think, and I was just getting off the heels of a horrible failure of a business that I tried to start, and I didn't know what to do with my life at the time. I was just like, I have all these ideas, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. I just spent all this money building an app that nobody wants to use, that I also wasn't very good at selling, which is really that's the failure. It's not the app was great, but I was bad.
But look where it led.
And Adam had asked, like, well, like, what is the theme, or like, what is the thing that you actually like want to accomplish in life?
Yeah.
And I told him, I was just like, well, I'm really interested in learning more about emotion, or like I've noticed the pattern in all of these big companies that everybody loves, like the Apples and the Disneys and the Ritz-Carltons and so on, that the thing that they all have in common is that they focus on the emotional experience more so than anything else. And I wanted to write a book about it because I didn't see any books that talked about kind of emotional intelligence in that way.
Yeah.
And he was just like, well, have you written anything before? I was like, yeah, I have. I wrote a little blog post like 6 months earlier called The Economics of Emotion and how the role of emotion affects businesses. And he was just like, cool, you should write a book. He introduced me to some friends of his.
And it was amazing. It is amazing.
It is amazing.
It is an amazing book.
Yeah, it really is.
Truly.
It really
Truly.
is. Well, can we talk a little bit about the failure beforehand? Because that's,
Everything starts with a failure.
It does.
It does.
It always leads us to something great, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Yep.
those are the moments that we like sit and we waffle in the moment, but then like hindsight is always 2020. So can you talk to us a little bit about like what you gained from that failure?
Yeah, it was actually 2 failures in one.
Excellent. Even better.
Even
Because-
better.
Go big. Yeah.
Because I had just started in 2016, I just lost my mom, and I had just started a job at Uber, and it was like a really cushy job. And then the boss that I had, one of the best bosses I've ever had, he was just really great. We spoke the same language. He knew exactly like how to challenge me, and I loved it. But the company overall, not a big fan. This is back when Travis Kalanick was still the CEO.
Yeah.
One of their values was toe stepping, like constantly challenging people in your team.
Great.
And you're like,
Awesome.
doesn't feel like a super awesome culture, but I really loved the team, and so I had this like internal fight with myself of like, and because I had just experienced the loss of my mom, I was just like, do I really want to spend any of my life doing something that I don't love?
Yeah.
Even though I love the people that I work with, the work that I was doing wasn't super fulfilling. It was okay, but the company I definitely didn't love.
Yeah.
And I had this opportunity, and I had an idea to build an app that allowed companies to kind of like customize the customer experience based off of as the customer, like your preferences. So if you're a vegetarian or something, you wouldn't have to tell the restaurant. The restaurant would already know, and they'd be able to kind of give you this white glove service. And anyway, so I hired a handful of engineers, and I had a technical co-founder who's really great. And then I spent all of my time and energy like designing the experience of using the app and what it would look like, because it's kind of a two-sided marketplace. And I spent 0 time selling the product to the people who would actually use it.
Hard. So
and it's because I was just
such
like,
a great idea.
Yeah.
It is a great idea.
It is a
So
great
great.
idea.
Yeah, well, I thought so. And anyhow, we had one sales guy, and he was really great. He got us in front of Starbucks and all these other things, and it was amazing. And yeah, I just didn't. I don't know. I had way more love for the concept than I did for the actualization of the thing, and I don't know how to explain that any better.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, whenever I was running out of money and we had Amy's Ice Cream and Phil's Ice House was using it. Kendra Scott was interested. Bird's Barbershop was interested. We were trying to do a lot more like local stuff here. And I was just like, well, I can't afford anyone else. Like, I can't afford to keep people on the team for that much longer.
Yeah.
And so we have to either pivot or we have to kind of just say thank you and leave, and that's kind of where my conversation with Adam came into play. And and so like I talked with my technical co-founder, and he's just like, this is where you want to pivot to is not really something that I'm interested in doing. And I was just like, that's fair. And I thought I was just like, there's no use trying to fight for it. I really still love the idea, but I think that this message of helping other businesses become more people-centric rather than just creating one small company that is people-centric, I thought that might be a little bit more effective. And, and this gentleman convinced me of that in a way. And so, yeah, that's kind of...
Now, this may be
That's about your failures.
this may be tangential, but I'm interested to know.
Sorry. I'm just kidding.
I'll leave you on a low note.
The failure podcast. But I'm interested to know, did any of those companies give you rationale for why they would or would not be interested in that product?
Yeah, well, the problem that they had with just saying yes is that they are approached by so many people. I guess I didn't really know. I mean, in Austin, it's a million startups, especially back then. It was a million startups.
Starting out.
Yeah. And so having that just being another voice or another email that they get that says, hey, would you like to be one of the first to try this product that probably won't work 100% of the time, and it would require you to like train your staff on how to use it so that way you can give your customer. It was just like it was a big, big ask.
Yeah.
And we had like the sushi restaurant here that we did a training for the staff. It was the only staff that we did a real training for, and they didn't end up using it. They were like, we already have like other tools that we have to use on a regular. This is just another tool. If it was integrated, then it'd be easier. And I was like, I'm looking at my bank account. I was like, integration sounds expensive.
We're not doing that.
So it was just like a matter of logistics.
Yeah.
I was focused on like once everything is perfect and everybody is using it, what is that experience? But I was not thinking of what happens before that. Like, how do you get to that kind of perfect scenario?
I think it's true of most creative people and processes.
Yeah.
It's like end gaming.
Yes.
100%. End gaming.
Yeah. What does the future look like? And then, what did you, so through all of that, what did you learn? And then how did that get you or inspire the book? Like, what was the process?
I learned that sales is not my thing. I don't like sales.
Sure.
I know how to phrase things to make it sound sexy, but I don't. But that means I'm in marketing, and that's where I am today. Asking for the sale and all that stuff was not my bread and butter, essentially, like I said, it's like I wanted to, all of it was steeped in like, how do you remove friction and frustration from a customer or even an employee experience? And then how do you then inject like joy? And that concept on its own, it's much easier to spread an idea than it is to spread an app. And so that concept on its own was kind of the beginnings of this blog post as well as the book itself, just trying to get the idea of, if everything that you do is run by people and it is like your customers are obviously people, your employees are obviously people, everything is built by people for people, then why are we not considering the emotional experience in literally everything that we do? Like from the water bottles that we use to obviously the iPads, these microphones, everything is made by a person for another person. And if we're not thinking about the emotional experience, then we're just
Why?
Yeah. Well, why does it exist?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the real value.
100%. So as you were going through and kind of developing the concept for this, like what were the big things that you felt like you took away as a person, but then also like in the context of producing this book or producing the content for the book?
The big themes, like putting it together, I'm really good at pattern matching. So I'm able to like look at a handful of things and being like, here's that through line. And so, like I mentioned, I looked to some of those bigger brands, the ones that a lot of people, that cult brands, is what we'd call them in the marketing world, the ones that engender so much loyalty from customers and employees. And I just dove headfirst into understanding like how they do what they do and why they do it. Like I worked at Apple for 5 years, so I kind of understood how the sausage was made from that standpoint. Then shortly after that, I went and I spent a lot of time with Ritz-Carlton in Dallas, got to like shadow some of their leaders and ask a lot of questions, got to like look at some of their training that they do for new employees. And I learned that Apple stole a lot of stuff from Ritz-Carlton. It was more of like it was a nod, a great artist steal, I guess.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
And then from Ritz-Carlton, I really wanted to know more about Disney because everybody loves Disney, but I hadn't been to Disney as an adult at that point.
Oh.
So I learned a lot from that. And the bottom line was that each and every single one of these organizations, spent way more time thinking about the employee experience than anything else. Or they spent a lot of time thinking about the emotional experience of their customer or their guest. And then they worked kind of backwards. And Steve Jobs has that kind of famous quote, as you start with the customer experience and you work your way back to the technology. And and that's kind of the start of the book, is like, how do you actually formulate the emotional strategy of a product or a service or the culture or even the reason why a business exists in the first place? If it's not centered around affecting people or enriching the lives of people, then again, why do you exist?
Yeah. So in that process, while you're, learning about these organizations, like what did you kind of learn about yourself?
I am a very emotional person. There's two things I'm really good at. It's intuition and impulse. I have very impulsive.
Good.
And there's definitely an overused skill on or overused version of both of those things. So I learned a lot about like the way that I would see something and I would get really frustrated, like, why don't they know better? Why don't they? And I would get mad. When it's just like, well, why am I getting angry? Like, there's nothing that's...
It's something that's gonna...
I don't feel like I'm being treated unfairly in any way. I'm not being blocked in any way. And yet here I was like having true, like deep feelings around. And then I would then turn that into an impulse of... telling people how angry I was or how frustrated, or I would be like, why aren't you doing this? And I would like patronize folks. And so I learned a lot when I was doing all this research and while I was shadowing a bunch of folks and doing a lot of people watching at these businesses. I was like, man, I really need to get control over my own emotions because like I'm trying to write a book about emotional intelligence and
gotta up your game.
I'm really like I'm really good at like observing, but like how can I actually I don't know, embody all these things that I'm learning? And so that was a really big moment for me. And I think even after the book, I still kind of had these impulses to just wear my heart on my sleeve. And so everyone knew how I felt at all times. I was happy. I'd be bouncing off the walls. If I was angry, like no one would want to talk to me. And it wasn't even until the pandemic when it's kind of out of the rat race for a second. And I was able to kind of slow down that I would actually have that time to kind of self-reflect and be like, what the fuck are you doing, Kyle? Yeah. Like, how why are you so upset about things that have no effect on you? Like, I thought that it was coming from a good place, and it kind of was, but it was also like, I just wanted to be right. Like, I wanted to be the thing. So I learned a lot of, I just became more self-aware, before, not so much, during, definitely, and then after, 100%. Like way more self-aware about my own feelings and how I manage them.
What did that process look like? Like, how did you, again, you're kind of doing the research for this book. You're recognizing, hey, like, I'm showing up this way. There's a need for me to kind of have some of this stuff a little bit more purposeful. You need to be a little bit more purposeful about it. And so then you get into the pandemic, you have some time to kind of reflect on it. What was that process like? Like, how did you?
It's a little bit of crying. Lots of anxiety.
It's way though.
Nice
just get the tears
cry.
out there.
Yeah.
Just get the deep cry out.
Yeah.
Open mouth, preferably.
Open where the tears go into the mouth, and you're just recycling.
It's the only way.
It's called emotional recycling.
Get that salt.
I love it.
What was the question? Sorry.
Well, what was the like? How did you? A, there's the awareness component, but then B, what did you do when you became aware to get to a place where you're like, okay, this is how I have to kind of manage, or I don't even know if manage is the right word, but just how did you,
even regulate?
Yeah.
Well, one, like I do have a generalized like anxiety disorder. Like I have a very hard time going outside now. And I spent a lot of time in the pandemic kind of like what I would normally do is I'd rip other people apart or other organizations apart and try to get down to like the essence and like why are they doing this? What is the intention? So, and I never turned the mirror on myself.
Do we ever?
Couldn't possibly
Does any of us?
So I wanted to understand like why am I so afraid? Why am I so afraid of like dying at a young age specifically? And and I was like, well, one, I just experienced, I lost a friend of mine in high school suddenly, got hit by a car. I lost my mom much sooner than I thought.
Right.
And also I lost like two cats, like 6 months apart from each other. And that was kind of a sudden thing. Yeah. So it's just like, well, death is all around us. Right?
Yeah. Hyper-aware.
Hyper-aware of that.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, well, people die. What happens when they die is, of course, the big mystery. But what happens on Earth when people die is that like people will remember how you made them feel, and that's kind of that Maya Angelou quote of forgetting what you said and what you did, but remembering how you made them feel.
Didn't you put that in your like first chapter? It was like very
it's my favorite.
upfront.
I love it. I feel that's a quote I go back to all the time. I just think it's such a
honestly, I think it's one of the most true things that have ever been said, and and so I didn't, because I wore my heart on my sleeve for such a long time, and everyone knew how I felt. I know that those emotions spread to others, and so when I was angry, other people would get frustrated, and when I was sad, like they'd be like in a kind of a mood, and so I was like, I don't want people to feel sad or angry every time I feel sad or angry. Like I need to figure out a way to kind of understand why I feel what I feel and find a way to move through that without affecting others in such a strong way. Yeah. And that was new for me.
That's huge.
That was new for me. And even now, like when I'm working with a bunch of different companies and executives at companies, and we're having like hard conversations around like, why aren't you paying your people a reasonable wage? Like it's 2023. And they would get really defensive as if I'm attacking them and not necessarily their P&L or, that kind of thing. Right. And I just noticed just like, I think a lot of folks, when they get angry, they want others to kind of feel what they feel, and so they might treat you like shit if they feel like shit, and just to feel some sort of
safety in numbers. It feels better if I'm mad and everyone else is mad. Then I must be right because everyone's mad too.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's feeling one, that you're not alone, and if you are alone, you don't want to feel alone. So you do whatever you can to
validation, right?
To feel validated. And in some cases, like folks come up with reasons to justify their anger.
Mhm.
And so they'll get really angry. And I did this too. It's like you get really angry and you start nitpicking at everything because like, oh, there's so many things for me to be angry about. That's why I feel anger.
Yeah.
Right.
Be like, okay, well, you really just got angry because your shirt's, super wrinkled and you have to be somewhere or something, But now you're looking for other reasons to kind of distract yourself from whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it did answer my question. Thank you. Well, so when you're right now, you've got this concept of this book and you're working with these organizations. What do you see as like one of the biggest challenge that individuals, and I think to your point, it's like right by your elbow.
I know. Got big elbows, I guess.
I love it. I'm just moving over.
We're fired from the studio.
But there's, I think there's something that you said around, just like the way that people sometimes show up in, in that kind of defensive space, like justifying their feelings or justifying their emotions. But also like with organizations, what are some of the challenges that you see with some of the people that you're working with right now? Like, what are the biggest things that are kind of coming up?
Everyone is stressed. Like, everyone is stressed for so many reasons outside of work. And then you add the work on top of that. I just bought a book. I haven't been able to read it yet. But it's about the effect that stress has on your entire life and that you literally can't do anything when you're just in that kind of horse blind or depth first thinking.
Yeah.
And so that's the big one, is that like everybody wants to do a good job and it's difficult to do a good job with limited resources, and everyone has limited resources right now.
Right.
So that's one. Two is that, like I say this all the time, is that the biggest deficit in every industry is soft skills and leadership. There's not a single
100%
industry that is doing well.
Yes.
Preaching to the choir.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's just like we, for as long as I know, we have been taking operationally gifted folks, like they're really good at their job as an individual contributor. And then we were like, what you should do?
Yeah.
You should tell other people how to do their job because you're so good at it. You should tell other people. And that's kind of the mentality that a lot of managers have is, I got promoted because I was really good at my job. And so I must, even though it wasn't said, I must have been chosen because I need to tell others how to do theirs.
Right.
And there's like no actual people leaders in the roles where they are leading people.
Oh my
100%.
Yes.
100%.
Yes. It's the biggest gap. It is.
Is right. Is right.
Bad.
Well, we were just talking about, how, leadership is so multi-layered, right? You have like the executional arm, which is just like, get the shit done, like get the numbers, make it happen. And then there's I have to like inspire humans to do something and then help them grow and develop. And then that's like a whole thing. Yeah. And then there's just like, how do we effectively like execute or like operationalize this team or this department, and like what's efficient and how do we make it more efficient? And there's kind of that arm. And then there's like the fourth tier, which is like, how do I recognize that my own like shit as a human can impact the way that I lead somebody else? Or how might their shit be challenged by the way that I potentially lead them?
Yeah.
Like that's there's like four, and all we usually do as a leader is we focus on the number one, and then all these other things that have to get done from a leadership standpoint just don't happen because we just have to execute.
Well, and all we say is, you've been here 5 years now, so now you can take that over. Congratulations.
Yeah.
You did good for 5 years.
Yeah. And then we say, go sit in go sit in this class about conflict resolution. Yeah. And then like, yay, like you did the class on conflict resolution or what not to say when you're hiring somebody. Yeah. And it's like, humans are like super complicated and like,
to put it nicely.
Humans, every single person is super complicated. Like, how do you move the needle when like
Yeah, that's why I don't blame leaders who are bad at leading. Like I was a really bad manager. I managed a support team, and I was not good because I hated my boss.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like the direction that he was taking the organization, and I was like, either I can be defiant and feel good about myself, and hopefully
And
lead like a revolution.
Right.
No, not that extreme, but
Yeah.
I can just like swallow my pride, which was not a thing that I was willing to do.
Yeah.
And just do what he was saying and whatever. And so he was a bad manager to me, and then I was just sharing the wealth with of horrible management with my
It
team.
trickles down. So I mean, and it's just the thing is with a manager, any kind of leader, your team, every time you add someone to your team, or it changes the dynamic. And so if what you're doing works, it might not work now that you have another person, and those relationships change. And I think investing in the fact that as a leader, your role is ever changing, ever evolving, depending on who's on your team, what they
100%.
need, is something that not a lot of people think about or believe or invest in. That if you want to be that leader, you constantly have to evolve and change with who's on your team and what their needs are, and in order to, get what you need and make sure that they're getting what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
I don't understand, and I'm sure I can Google it, but I don't understand where the idea that it has to just be one person that does all of these things, that has to do the operational, like you have to make sure productivity is up, and you have to make sure everything is efficient. You also have to make sure that all of these complicated humans on your team are happy, they're inspired, and that there's no friction between them and their best work.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like 5 separate jobs.
Yeah,
and we've given it
100%.
to one person.
Right.
And we don't pay that one person even that much better than, it was maybe like a 30% more than at most, maybe than their employees. And so it's just like, in my head, it's just like, you should have an operationally minded person in an operational role where you're like, what are the most efficient ways to do this? What is the best way to raise productivity with the same amount of resources? And then there should be a second role where it's just like a coach, like a Ted Lasso for each team, where you're saying, hey, I noticed like Jill is having a really hard time with a specific task. I want to get to the bottom of like, what is that blocker, that barrier for her
100%.
for this specific thing? Is it just like a time management situation?
Is it a skill gap? Is it, what is it?
Yeah, because I think if you try to have both of those types of personalities in one, you're mostly measured on the productivity. Like the people above you are looking at spreadsheets. They're not
100%.
looking at smiling faces.
Right.
But the smiling faces create the work that ends up on spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you don't have a smiling face, you're not going to have a great spreadsheet.
Yep.
Right.
And so just having someone to manage, like coach the people, while you also have someone managing the operations of those people. And then those two people can have a really great relationship of like, hey, like so-and-so isn't doing so hot in these areas. Can you talk to them and just figure out what's going on? Like, oh, actually, I do know what's going on.
Yeah.
They're having a really hard time at home. I made sure that, whatever. I don't know. It's just having some sort of conversation, but making it one person is stressful.
It's old school. It's archaic.
I think that's something I'm curious about is, I know Leslie and I kind of have a similar background in doing, talent and lots of behavioral stuff. And so really digging in on people's behavior. But I feel like there's a huge gap on, okay, now we have all this information. Cool. We just give people an excuse of, well, I'm this behavior. So that's why I get to yell at you and tell you what to do, because that's my behavior. So I'm sorry. And really allowing people to play into that is how you go into companies and show that awareness, the emotional awareness, and kind of maybe where their blind spots are. But how do you implement, what do they do with that? Like once you know that these are the places that you might have, could be a blind spot for you, or behaviorally you're aware of this, but how do you implement it into an actual plan of how to bring people together and be successful?
You have to recognize or acknowledge the thing.
Yeah. It's a big thing.
You're like,
Starts there.
we just found this elephant in the room.
Yeah. Turns out.
Yeah.
And I'm the elephant. It's acknowledging it. Also, like the thing that's not happening that I realized would solve a lot of problems is there's not a lot of like listening campaigns. Like
Sure.
employers aren't listening to their employees.
Yeah.
They're just assuming, like, especially businesses have been around for a long time, and those leaders who've been in the similar role or have moved up in the company over 30 years, they're like, well, I got here because I did this thing back in the early 2000s. And be like, that was 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
That was 20 years ago.
So true.
And we've had a pandemic and a terrorist attack. It's
changed.
Yeah.
it has changed.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you can just do the status quo, the business as usual thing, and whatever, then you're kidding yourself. You're clearly afraid of change.
Right.
If you continue to do the same thing over and over again. So it's I kind of lost my train of thought there. I apologize. I essentially was getting at, like, there's no one that asks specific questions from employees around what they need in order to do their best work.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to be like, well, they're just going to ask for $1 million and to be able to work from home and not be held accountable. It's like, have you asked them? Like,
Yeah.
prove me wrong that they're not going to say any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Just ask them, like, what do you need in order to do your best work?
Mm-hmm.
And then just sit back and listen.
Yeah.
And that doesn't
Simple
happen.
question.
Doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
No, they send out pulse surveys and engagement surveys, and it's a cold email. It's like feeding an animal at the zoo. You're just throwing stuff at them, and then, like, if they eat it, you're like, they must love that food, and you're like, no, it's the only food.
That's all they
Yeah,
got.
that's it. Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to ask the panther what he wants to eat, then he probably won't say, like, chicken feed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just like one of those things. Is just like you have to acknowledge that there's a opportunity here.
Yeah.
But then ask the people who are going to be most affected by your behavior as a leader
Right.
what they need in order to do their best work. And you're going to find, like, they have a lot of really interesting ideas that go beyond what you are capable of thinking of, because now you're in a different mindset. You're not on the front
100%.
lines or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
They see things that normal leaders who are sitting in the rooms can't see. So when you're thinking about the work that you've put into the economics of emotion, and either individuals or, like, organizations, if you were saying, like, if you could just implement one thing or two things, whether it's me as an individual or an organization as a whole, what would those be?
Everybody goes through, like, the same kind of emotional intelligence training,
Mm.
and it can be super basic. Like, why do we feel the core emotions that we feel? Are you guys familiar with the core emotions? So, like, why do we feel joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust? If you just know those basics, like, you feel anger because you feel blocked or you feel like you've been treated unfairly. So when you feel frustrated next time, you'll be like, do I feel like I'm being treated unfairly in this situation? Or do I feel like I'm being blocked?
Yeah.
And if you can identify the difference between those two, and you're like, I feel like I'm being blocked. Okay, what am I being blocked from?
Right.
So just, like, super basic stuff like that, but making sure that everybody goes through it, not just leaders. I think it's obviously way more important for leaders, but I think it's also really important for someone who's in support and they're constantly talking to angry people.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Or someone who's in marketing and you're trying to make sure that you are speaking to the emotional experience of the people that you're trying to buy your product.
Right. Right.
And then also just teaching folks how to have a feedback of culture, I think, or a culture of feedback, is also super important. So that'd be like one or two of the things that I would say, like, would solve a lot of the problems that I see a lot of companies having nowadays.
When you're talking about the training, the emotional intelligence training, what is the outcome that you would want those organizations to have with that? Like, if there was, like, a tangible outcome and we're going to implement some emotional intelligence training, what would that be, or what would that look like?
The short-term outcome people would be a little bit more self-aware. They'd be able to communicate, I think, a little bit easier. And I think you could see that effect pretty quickly. And then the long term, I think just overall, the well-being of an employee will improve because now emotion is top of mind for a lot of folks. The emotional experience is top of mind for a lot of folks within the organization. So they are, you've got this recency bias where it's top of mind. So that's the filter that you run things through.
Right.
And you're like, that I see a lot of people getting frustrated with every time that they contact our support team, they're pissed off. Why are they so pissed off? Is it because it's difficult to get in contact with support? Is it because the product is just that bad? Are we just like setting the wrong expectations in our sales process? Like that's the kind of thing that I think you'd see from a long-term perspective when you prioritize a more effective communication within your team and then just understanding how emotions work.
And then ideally is that training giving people pathways within the given organization for actionable steps. Because I think we're all about the why, which is so awesome. And we've talked a lot about the why already, but there's also a what at some point that comes from the why, hopefully, right? I mean, so where does the what fit into all of this?
How so? Like, obviously, you've the why being the purpose.
Yeah. So if I come up with, I am feeling disgusted for this particular reason, an emotion I not infrequently
I was like,
feel.
that's your go-to. Interesting.
Why would I choose that? Yeah. If I am feeling disgust for a particular reason, I am taught, here is why you may be feeling this, right?
Yeah.
And then I learned to acknowledge why, or to discern in a given circumstance why I'm most likely feeling this. So then, how do I proceed within where does the process implementation or the sort of protocol discernment come in this whole thing?
Yeah, I'll use your example of disgust.
Great.
So we feel disgust because we feel that there's a threat to our health, mental health, physical health, so on.
Interesting.
So anytime you hate someone, it is because you feel like they are toxic to you and your psyche or your social group or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So using that example, knowing that that's why you feel disgust, that it's a threat to your health, you would want to try to find out what is the thing that is creating that toxicity, right? And it might be how someone approaches you with feedback or how they even manage a meeting. Like, how do they lead the meeting? Well, it was super patronizing. It's not like I'm disgusted with them. I hate when they run the meeting because they suck at it.
Yeah.
But being able to identify like what is that toxic part and then call it out, call it by
so
its
that
name.
it is on me in that moment to have that interaction on my own with that other employee, or to follow some kind of predetermined pathway, right, within to a resolution.
It's having the confidence to have that conversation.
So confidence,
right? Well, and I
I
think part of it is just going back to what you were saying about awareness, like and it sounds very similar to like trigger response. Like anytime you're triggered, it could be any of those emotions that you're feeling, but to take a moment to ask like, what is causing this trigger in me, whether it's disgust or joy, even joy or anger, what is causing this in me? And then what need do I have that must be met or that I feel like is not being met? And then to flip the script to say, well, what need do they have?
Yeah.
Because again, there's like empathy.
Why are they coming across?
Yeah, 100%. And even just making space for empathy around like, if I feel disgust, they're showing up this way, I can empathize that there's a need that they have that is not being met as well. And so how do we as two humans feeling a way about each other come to some common ground or some like equal playing field, and that could be it could be communication. It could just be for the person who's experienced the disgust, a little bit of space, right? Just to say,
name it, be like, and then
I'm feeling it. I
it
need
more of your time.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
disgusting. And I'm good.
And goodbye.
Right. But there is, but to your point, Kyle, it's like so much of it is just about taking a moment to say, I feel this way. I have a need that's not being met. Let me just like sit in that for a minute. And I think in your book, you talk about the 90 seconds, right? Do you talk about like giving it 90 seconds or something like that?
I say a lot of things in the book that
maybe not. But I felt like there was something in there about just giving when you're experiencing an emotion, just giving it 90 seconds before reacting, before becoming an immediate reaction or something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of that impulse part of me. It's just like I felt something and there was a very little period of time between that feeling and me communicating that anger or frustration or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah.
And so, absolutely just going slowly. Like things are going to be fine if you just like think through it. But definitely taking the time. It does fall on, I think, on the individual. It's an interpersonal skill.
Right.
And you need to have, again, the courage to speak to another human being about their intention or their emotion, because maybe someone is toxic in a meeting or when they lead a meeting is because they don't often get a chance to lead stuff and they want to show how good they are. Like they feel like they are much more talented than the attention that they're getting. So any attention that they get, they kind of up it 150 or 200% just to get the point across in a short period of time.
It's an opportunity for that.
And it feels really gross to everybody else because you're like, wow, you're really trying really hard to be smart and be a leader. But this person is just like, well, this is the only time that I get. So like I have to kind of put my 150 or 200% of myself into it. And it can be a little icky sometimes. I was that icky person for a while. Like I just wanted to be validated and heard so bad. And I had a really difficult time of communicating just that core feeling. So all the feelings that were surrounding not being validated or not being heard was that anger, that frustration, and I would communicate that instead, rather than the real reason that I felt that way.
Right. It's so important, and I think you show this in the book. Like it's so important for us to own. We have to own ourselves. Like we have to own the way we feel. We have to own how we show up. 100%. Cannot control anybody else, how anybody else feels, how they respond, but we can control that one thing. And so just the awareness of it is huge. So, Kyle, where can people learn about you, get your book, all of those things?
They can go to The Economics of Emotion or economicsofelmotion.com, and that's takes you right to the Amazon page.
Buy the book.
You really should.
It's really good.
It is really
very
great.
Good. Yes,
it's very nice to be able to say. I do love. I'm working on the audiobook right now. A friend of mine is going to be recording it. And so I have to revisit a lot of the themes and a lot of the language that I used. I was like, wow, this is very clearly a 27-year-old who wants to be taken seriously. And so it's trying to, I'm wrestling with my younger self at the moment. I was just like, I want the concepts to be there, but the language, I might use some different language for the audiobook. So
it's still really great. It doesn't read that way.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. My anxiety just lowered a little bit.
It's great. It's really great. Okay, so economicsofelmotion.com, is that what you said?
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else, you guys?
Yeah, how do you find out more about Enso?
Oh, yeah. You can go to ensocc.com to learn a little bit about us. And then we're also asking to subscribe to this podcast.
Please subscribe.
And, please subscribe.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kyle, for joining us. We really appreciate you.
It means a lot.
Really
always great.
Came as you are. So we appreciate you.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.